everyone, and welcome to the 14th Canadian Science Policy Conference. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à la 14e Conférence sur les politiques scientifiques canadiennes. My name is Peter Searles, and I'm a PhD candidate and a Vanier Scholar of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Toronto, and a senior volunteer with the Canadian Science Policy Centre. I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Ted Hewitt for the 2022 Canadian Science Policy Conference interview series. Ted is the president of the Social Science and Humanities Research Council. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here today and to have a chance to chat.
Great. So the Social Science and Humanities Research Council is very prominently positioned, and I think it's also quite well reflected in the mandate, to build knowledge, understanding about people, cultures, and societies, and then use that knowledge to drive innovations for our most pressing challenges. This has certainly been central to our understanding of the pandemic over the past few years in addressing many of the societal challenges that have come with it. But as we continue to move beyond the pandemic, what do you see as some of the most pressing challenges that you foresee in the coming years, and how is SSHRC positioned to address these?
So I would address this this way, first by saying that our primary objective and our primary role, as based on our mandate, is to support fundamental research. So in effect, we're supporting the researchers themselves who, through their own careers and their own devices and their own discussions within their home institutions, determine what, in their view, constitute the most pressing areas that need to be addressed. So that's a very important role. It also leads to the development of a research system where researchers themselves, through the diversity of approaches they take and the subjects that they will examine, can sometimes come up with surprising or unintended results which help us better deal with some of the challenges that we're seeing in a rather unintentional way. And we all know how this works in the case, for example, of work that was done on artificial intelligence and no one quite knew what it was for, or quantum, which nobody really knows quite what it's about. These things all emerge from curiosity-driven research. So it's really important to maintain that focus. En termes des défis qu'on confronte maintenant, c'est évident que l'économie, par exemple, c'est tellement important. Changement de climat sont deux sujets importants à traiter à ce point ici au Canada et dans le monde. These are the kind of things you would think of if someone said, well, what kind of things do we have to grapple with? Pandemics, the impacts of pandemics. I would think more broadly, we should be thinking about the introduction of new technologies, which is quite important, how societies will adapt and implement, and the impacts of developing these technologies, whether they're AI-based or quantum-based or whatever. We should be thinking, obviously, about information development, disinformation, the kinds of issues we've seen that pose such threats to democracy as well. So in some ways, just to conclude, it's not for SSHRC to determine that. We try and facilitate the conversations that allow researchers to tell us, what's important, and we do that through mechanisms such as, for example, the Imagining Canada's Future initiative, the work we do with government departments on policy, where we bring researchers together to help us better understand what's coming and to help them to develop the research that Canada is going to need in the future.
So as we continue to orient ourselves towards a post-pandemic future, we especially consider the many disparities in access and inclusion that were highlighted by the pandemic. I know SSHRC has launched a number of initiatives aimed at tackling these disparities, such as the Gender-Based Violence Research Initiative and the SSHRC Advisory Committee to address barriers to accessibility. Can you tell us a little bit more about these initiatives and the kind of main goals of these programs?
Comme vous avez mentionné, on a implanté beaucoup d'initiatives liées à l'équité, diversité et inclusion sur les programmes des chaires, par exemple, le programme de CRSH, en termes de savoir, partenariat, et ça va continuer en termes de change de règlement ou des considérations d'informations qu'on a exigées des chercheurs et chercheuses dans leur soumission. En même temps, c'est tellement important de comprendre et de communiquer le fait que l'excellence dépend totalement sur notre capacité d'implanter ce régime d'équité, diversité et inclusion pour attirer le talent de tout le monde ici au Canada et dans le monde, et de ne pas perdre ce talent dans les communautés marginalisées, par exemple, ici au Canada. it's so important, and my work in Brazil, I think, taught me this many years ago, that in working in communities that were marginalized or where people's talents were being left behind and forgotten in so much of the world, this taught me how important it is to emphasize the notions of equity, diversity, and inclusion in research, because we will lose that talent as we move forward. We won't be able to build excellence truly in research until we've developed those mechanisms and those policies that will ensure that everybody has access to research funding and is able to demonstrate their talent.
Very much so. I mean, it's something that's being quite well reflected across the entire world, and as you mentioned, your work in Brazil as well. And it is very promising to see that there are a number of initiatives that are coming out of SSHRC and across the tri-agency as well. So one of the most prominent trends in contemporary research is in transdisciplinary ideas and trying to bridge the gap between researchers in different fields. And this is something we actually were just discussing on the CRCC panel here at the CSPC. So while historically Canada has looked at researchers distinctly falling into each one of the tri-agencies in its funding agencies, I know there's a lot of initiatives such as the NFRF that we were discussing earlier that really promote this interdisciplinarity. So what do you think are some of the biggest interdisciplinary research challenges, and how is SSHRC and the rest of the Tri-Council really working to address this?
I think climate change is a good example of that. There's no way that you're going to get at solutions to climate change or help communities adapt without an interdisciplinary approach. I just don't see how. The same is true of pandemic-related issues, misinformation, vaccine hesitation, anti-masking and so forth, or anti-mandate type of behaviors and activities. Those require, broadly interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches. The development of good science, yes, but the ability to communicate that evidence to people, to help them understand how we need to behave in terms of promoting public health initiatives. En termes de multidisciplinarité, on fait, comme vous avez mentionné, le CRSH et les autres agences aussi ont développé des programmes spéciaux pour attirer des demandes de subventions dans les domaines interdisciplinaires. Le programme Nouvelles Frontières, par exemple, ça marche très bien à ce point. Il y a d'autres programmes aussi plus grands, l'apogée, programme de chair, plus interdisciplinaire que disciplinaire, je dirais. But there's another dimension of this, and what we're trying to promote, or what we're trying to encourage, is for people to think about crossing borders when, in fact, that makes a lot of sense or makes good sense in terms of developing research results that can have impact. So the multidisciplinary program that I was talking about is great, but we also have new programming through our tri-agency interdisciplinary peer review process that allows people to build multidisciplinarity into their existing disciplinary activities and programming. So for example, you can apply for an insight grant. Let's say, and just for sake of argument, because we've been talking about it, in environment or climate change research. And you may need, and your primary concern may be impact of climate change and on communities and on behavior of individuals and on the need for conservation, let's say, or behavior change to deal with climate change. But you may also need scientists to help you sort of understand the trends and what's happening on the ground in climate change, whether that be through rise in temperatures and what's causing that, or rates of pollution and so forth. And you may need health researchers as well. So now, in the last 2 years, we've launched this pilot program we call TAPER. And the idea is you can apply to your own agency, in this case SSHRC, for insight. You can tick a box that says that my research fundamentally crosses the mandates of the other 2 agencies or 1 agency, and then it goes to a separate peer review process that the agencies manage with a multidisciplinary panel. So in this way, we're not saying that disciplinary research is a bad thing. By all means, go ahead and do the work that you need to do. What we're saying is that, if there are elements that fall outside our council, you don't need to worry anymore. You can include this in your regular application, and now we've found a way to help you build that in and to peer review and to fund that research that you've undertaken.
And I think that's kind of a perfect way to position it, that there are so many problems coming forward that are going to touch on many different fields that are going to have to be interdisciplinary, and they might not necessarily fall just into the NFRF or something like that that's very forward focused and some kind of more risky things. They might be critical fundamental research we need to be doing, but still touching on these different areas. So that's a great way to position it.
À travers les programmes que je mentionnais aussi, on essaye d'aider les recherches, de perdre le peur qu'il y en a dans le domaine de research interdisciplinaire, de rendre tout ça plus facile, en fait, pour les chercheurs.
Yeah, make it as easy as possible and make it very forward thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Moins de barrières, en fait.
And so in a similar vein, I know that SSHRC plays quite a big role in a number of collaborations with other government agencies and a number of NGOs. And so what are some of the big opportunities that are being pursued right now, and what kind of excites you the most? And where do you think some of these forward opportunities are going to come from?
Jusqu'à ce point, on a travaillé fort avec les agences dans les pays bien connus, comme par exemple les États-Unis, en Europe. Aussi au Brésil, par exemple, on connaît bien les agences, on a déjà développé des programmes intéressants comme la plateforme transatlantique. Par exemple, le groupe de Bonn, on participe à ça aussi. Ils sont bonnes occasions de développer des programmes qui peuvent servir mieux les chercheurs ici en Amérique du Nord, aussi les Amériques en général, en Europe, etc. What we have to think about a bit more is how to expand that collaboration beyond the kind of usual suspects, if I can use that term. And we've managed to do this in a unique way through the Climate Change Initiative, where we've attracted, of course, our partners in Brazil, who are usually with us, but also South Africa. Partners we haven't worked with in Norway and Switzerland. And we've opened conversations with funding agencies in Japan and Singapore and elsewhere. So it's super important, I think, that we start to develop means to reach out a bit further. Also important to work more closely with marginalized communities in the Global South, but also Indigenous communities here in Canada, and to bring them into the process and to find ways to encourage capacity building there as well, which we've done through our Setting New Directions strategy, which of course is not just SSHRC, but has embraced the entire CRCC array. But I would say that's probably one of the main challenges that we'll have over the next few years, is how to sort of enlarge the circle and build that comfort and build these larger international initiatives.
Yeah. Well, and that makes complete sense that it would begin with something like climate change as something that is going to be a global issue. And
Exactly, something everyone says, oh, wow. And that's exactly what happened with that initiative. It was like, oh, yeah, absolutely, this is big. We have to talk. So
yeah, bring all the right people into the room.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. Well, you've been a longtime supporter of the CSPC, and we're extremely thankful to have you and the SSHRC as partners of the Centre's activities. As part of this support, you've seen CSPC transition into an online conference of the past 2 years, but fortunately we're back to an in-person conference this year. So what excites you most about the conference returning to its in-person format and the CSPC in general?
Évidemment, l'occasion de parler directement face à face avec nos collègues. Ici à Ottawa, c'est fantastique, en 3D, 3 dimensions en fait. It's so important, to be able to talk and interchange and to read, people's body language in real time, because and to do that in a kind of three-dimensional way, because you're dealing one-on-one, but you're also aware of what's going on here, and you're hearing bits of conversations there, and you're seeing people you'd never see virtually, because you'd have to connect intentionally. You're seeing people by chance. We can't lose that. We're not moving to a virtual world in that sense, and I really hope we don't. Although it's not a blip either. I mean, we're going to use it. We've learned to use it better. We'll see more of it, but nothing's going to replace this opportunity, and particularly this opportunity that CSPC has provided us all to talk about the thing that fascinates us the most, and that's science policy, written large.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hewitt, for taking the time to chat and sharing your progress and outlook with our viewers as well. especially as you've shared with us the way that SSHRC has positioned itself very nicely within the Tri-Council and the CRCC and other government agencies. It's really going to make for remarkable innovation and leadership to continue within these contemporary research ideas. So I'm excited to see what the widespread impacts are for these initiatives, and we're very much looking forward to continuing to have you as a member of the CSPC community, and thank you very much for your panel earlier today.
Non, de la part du CRSH, un grand merci à vous aussi. It's been great to have this chance to talk.
Thank you. And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. We look forward to having you at CSPC 2022 and beyond.